Hey, thanks for joining me. I really like looking at this topic. You can almost say this is the origin story for me. I'm looking at the kingdom in the way that I'm looking at it in these lessons, with the necessary destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, and how that led to a new Jerusalem coming and God's kingdom dwelling with us. If we look at Acts chapter 8, this is a pretty cool, familiar story about the Ethiopian eunuch. And it's in Acts chapter 8, verses 26 through 30. The angel of the Lord tells Philip to go down and into Gaza. And he goes down there, and there's an Ethiopian eunuch who, is under Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians. This guy was a guy of some significance in Ethiopia. He was a eunuch, but he was in charge of all the treasure. So he's returning from Jerusalem. He went there to worship, and he's reading out of the book of Isaiah. So Philip is told to go near to this guy and join to his chariot. So he runs up and he asks him, "Do you understand what you're reading?" And he said, "How can I except some man should guide me?" And he desired Philip that he would come up and sit with him. So this eunuch is reading Isaiah, and if you look in Isaiah, it tells us what part he's reading from. He's reading in Isaiah 53, and this is very familiar to all of us as well. But he's reading Isaiah 53, around 6 through 8. You could say 4 through 8. He's probably reading the whole chapter. But, surely he's borne our griefs, he's carried our sorrows, yet did we esteem him stricken, smitten of God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. So he's reading about Jesus, the prophecy of how that Jesus would come and bear our iniquities. By his stripes we're healed. And so I'd like to slow down for a second. Let's look at the who, what, when, where, and why of this for context. So we've got this Ethiopian eunuch. That's who it is. He's a eunuch. Where was he coming from? Well, he went to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. He's on his way back to Ethiopia. So, what's he reading? He's reading Isaiah. Why is he reading this section of Isaiah, do you think? I'm going to admit, this is a little bit of conjecture on my part, but I think he was reading in Isaiah 56, which is just a page away, because it's about eunuchs. There's a promise made to eunuchs in Isaiah 56. So after the things in Isaiah 53, there's a promise made to those that are barren. There's a promise made to those that are strangers. There's a promise made to eunuchs. And in Isaiah 56, verse 3, it says, Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, The Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree. For thus saith the Lord unto the eunuchs, that keep my Sabbaths and choose the things that please me, and take hold of my covenant. Even them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. So I'm just guessing, but I'm pretty sure this eunuch knew this chapter about the eunuchs. And there's a promise made that's a wonderful promise to eunuchs. And so, if I was a eunuch, I might start reading what leads up to this promise that's made to us. And in Isaiah 53, we see how he's led before like a lamb to the slaughter. And he's like a sheep before the shearers. And he's asking in Acts chapter 8, is this speaking of the prophet or of another man? And Philip starts to preach Jesus to him. And what did he say exactly? We don't know. But we know that back in Acts chapter 8, that he asks Philip if he can be baptized. And Philip, he says, if thou believest in all thine heart, thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And he commanded the chariot to be still. He baptized him. And then he goes off rejoicing. So I think with the context of everything that we've been reading in the New Testament, when it comes to the kingdom and the promises that are made, I think the promises in Isaiah are the promises of the kingdom. Read through there. In those chapters from 53 to 56, it even mentions as in the days of Noah. I mean, I think this stuff's I know it's all tied together. I just hope that you can make some connections. Here's the eunuch. He is rejoicing that these promises are about to be fulfilled to him. And why is that important? Because number one, he's a eunuch. Number two, he just got back from Jerusalem. The eunuchs were allowed at the temple, but they weren't allowed very much access into the temple. There was separation, just like the strangers. And there was separation because they were a dry tree. They could not produce children to add to the kingdom of Israel. So they were not as important in access to the temple as, say, a Pharisee who had many sons. So he had just gotten back from there, and now with this preaching of Jesus, and then him reading through Isaiah, which is talking about the kingdom coming and the promises, he's rejoicing. And I think this is one reason why we really need to see that the kingdom of God did come, that the temple did have to be destroyed, because the temple limited access. I mean, this guy's visiting the temple after the veil's been rent in half, after the crucifixion of Christ. And yet he still has very limited access. And that's why that age had to end, because God had to destroy that temple and that city so that he could make his promises available to all of mankind. So he could dwell with this eunuch even. I mean, he's welcome inside his walls. I think it's a good conversation to have about the death question. There shall be no more death. And if you look back in Genesis chapter 2, God puts Adam in the garden. He has all the trees. He plants one tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of good and evil. He tells Adam, you can eat of anything, just don't eat of the tree. That's what's beautiful about humans. We're different than the angels. He gives us the ability of choice, because it's pleasing to him when we choose to do the right thing, to be obedient. It's pleasing to God. Adam, he's given Eve. Eve in chapter 3, I'm not going to read there because this is pretty familiar to everybody. the serpent approaches Eve and says, can you eat of all the trees in the garden? She said, I could eat all the trees of the garden, but we can't touch the tree in the midst of the garden. We can't eat the fruit thereof, or we'll surely die. And the serpent says, if you eat that fruit, thou shalt not surely die. You'll become as gods. You'll know the difference between good and evil. And she looks at the fruit. It looks good. She takes of the fruit. She bites the fruit. She takes it to Adam. She says it's a good fruit. And Adam partakes of the fruit, and immediately they know that they're naked. And they run and hide, and they sew some fig leaves together. And God comes down. He's been dwelling with them daily. He's been interacting with them. They're dwelling in his garden. Now, he said, if you eat of this fruit, you will surely die. And the word die means to be executed, physical death. The snake said, you won't die. So God, did he kill him that day? They died spiritually. They died, they created separation between them and God. God kicked them out of the garden. He put them out to till the field. There was separation. Christ, when he comes in Isaiah 53, the prophecy there and his fulfillment in the New Testament, he is making a payment. With his stripes we're healed. He's atoning for our sin. All of mankind. We've all gone astray. And our iniquities are laid upon him. So he bridges the gap. He's there to create access again. Access to where God and man can dwell together. That's part of the kingdom. That's why this age had to end, and it would end at the end of that generation. Everywhere we're reading, it's talking about that generation. It's everywhere. When you open your eyes and see it, it's pretty hard to ignore it. So access is the key in this kingdom. And that's why I think this eunuch is rejoicing. He is going to have access to the Holy of Holies in this new Jerusalem. He had never had that kind of access. He couldn't add a son to the kingdom of Israel, but he could add sons into the kingdom of God. I mean, he could share God with others and lead them that they might be sons of God. He could add to the kingdom. He had new purpose. Now I want you to ask yourself this question. If the kingdom, if everything didn't come together as the prophets and the law predicted it would, if Jerusalem and its destruction, we know it happened, the temple's destroyed, we know it happened within 40 years of Christ's ministry, if that's not some significance, I mean, because the temple was there so that God could dwell with Israel. And there are sometimes we're reading in the Bible, heaven and earth. I mean, that sometimes is referring to heaven being the temple and earth being the land of Israel. Heaven is there dwelling with earth. Now, not anybody could access God there. God had rules, and he allowed a sacrifice once a year with the high priest when he was dwelling there. We know that he left them for 400 years. The Spirit their wickedness was not something he could tolerate. And here's the end of it. Here comes the judgment. Here comes the great and terrible day of the Lord. The day where he destroys the wicked. The city in Revelations is, I believe it's Jerusalem. We can look at the city some more. We know that the city and the great harlot are the same thing. And she has fornicated with all the nations. That's Israel. She was unfaithful to God. But once that's destroyed, it opens up a whole new ball game for not just the Jewish believers, but for every other believer. All the Gentiles are now, that we have access to God that only the high priest had access to in the Old Testament. It's pretty amazing to think about the eunuch. You know, why is he reading there? What is he's gaining access. I mean, God's going to give him an everlasting name, something eternal in his eternal kingdom. And that's pretty great when it's all fulfilled that way. But if his kingdom hasn't even arrived yet, and it's still in our future, where he's coming with great power and glory to dwell with man, this guy's rejoicing for something that he's not even going to experience. I think the eunuch really had an opportunity to experience it. When we look at death, I look at it as separation. You know, they're kicked out of the garden. The kingdom of God is dwelling within you. That was in our last video. I mean, the kingdom of God, he could have access from anywhere that he was, even if he was in his servant's quarters in the queen's place, he could access God from there. He didn't have to drive his chariot all the way to Jerusalem anymore. It's pretty powerful. I hope that you can see that death, and you can read Romans 5-8 if you really want to study death. Paul goes into great detail about that. But isn't it separation more so than anything? Isn't that what Christ fixed for our humanity? He's the second Adam. He comes back and he fixes these things to where we can dwell with God again, just like they did in the garden. So I love that story. I hope you'll look at Acts chapter 8, 26-39, Isaiah 53, where he's reading, Isaiah 56, where it talks about the eunuchs. And then you can look at the Genesis story as well. But I think that's it for today. When I'm thinking about death, I think about it in these terms. And I hope you'll consider it. Thank you.